Okay. Good morning. It's good to see everyone. So, this particular topic, I don't know, it's huge, I guess you could say. I could say that there's a lot to talk about. And so I hope we'll reach most, maybe, we'll say most of the Makorot. And even then, this is also in of itself truncated. But the question is as old, it maybe goes back at least to Abraham, in terms of his decisions with regard to Mitzrayim and what he tells Paro and putting Sarah at risk, etc. Maybe that questions already this issue of pragmatism as opposed to ideals. Certainly in this week's Parsha, we have several incidents. The meeting, the greeting of Yaakov with Esav at the beginning of the Parsha, and Yaakov's steps that he takes in that context. I just want to focus very briefly, just from the perspective from the Parsha, just to crystallize the idea. I think it perhaps is most starkly brought out with regard to what one say the machloket between Shimon and Levi on the one hand and Yaakov on the other, with regard to what steps need to be taken with regard to the incident in Shechem. And you could talk about the entire question. In other words, whether the initial the initial proposal that is put forth, that the people of Shechem undergo Brit Milah. What was the rationale? The Torah says that was taken bi'orma, was taken with a certain amount of cleverness, deceit, etc. What was their intent? How to handle it? Here you have a situation, as we're all familiar with, of a group of people, right? This family, with the core of what will become Am Yisrael, at a marked disadvantage, because after all they are seriously outnumbered. Dinah is being held hostage, and how do you deal with that? Right. So the initial proposal, perhaps it was a bluff, perhaps it was an intent for Shechem to back down and to assume that the cost was too high. Be that as it may, we all know how it turns out, and I just want to focus on the last two psukim of the parak. The entire parak Lamed Daled focuses on the story, and the last two psukim, what I wanted to start with. Vayomer Yaakov el Shimon ve'Levi. So Yaakov turns to Shimon and Levi. They've already massacred the city. Achartem oti lahavisheni biyoshev haaretz baknani uveprizi. So very strong words. You've polluted me. You've made me stink amongst the inhabitants of the land. Now you expect at this point, or at least I don't know. I would expect at this point for Yaakov to give a strong condemnation of the murder because it's murder. But that's not what he says. He says, Va'ani b'tei mispar, v'ne'esvu alai, v'hikuni v'nishmati ani uveti. Right, so we are few in number. Yaakov doesn't even say we. He says, I am few in number. Right? We are a small group of people. We're a small family. V'ne'esvu alai, and they will gather against me, v'hikuni v'nishmati ani uveti, and they will harm us, destroy us, eradicate us, myself and my household. And it could very well be that Yaakov is specifically uses the singular and not talking about us, because he wants to drive home to Shimon and Levi that what they're outside. This is what you have done, but you're doing it to me. It's not even that you're doing it to us as a group. You're doing it to me personally. Okay, fine. What does Shimon and Levi respond? Vayamru hachzonai yaset achotenu. That's very 4 words. Well, will they make a harlot out of our sister? That's it. And that's the end of the story. Right? It's if you continue into the to the next parak. So Yaakov uvanav move on. Torah says God protects them. They are not harmed in any way. Move on a few more prakim. And the beginning of next week's Parshat Vayeshev. And where are the brothers decide to go bring their flocks? To Shechem. In other words, it's just a few years later, and they have absolutely no concern. They go to Hebron, which is a considerable distance from Shechem, about 100 kilometers or so, and then they come back to Shechem. They're not at all concerned that, seemingly, that they're going to fall in any harm's way. What?
Everybody was wiped out.
In Shechem itself, but the surrounding towns. And so, to get to Shechem today, you have to go past Ramallah. I mean, you have to, there are a lot of things that are going on. So what is, so if I look at the Torah from this perspective, right, so here what do I have? I have an old man. Yaakov at this point is, and you can do the math, it's not Midrashim, Yaakov is roughly 100 years old. Somewhere between 99 and 102. Okay? The boys, and I call them boys because they're boys, they are in their early teens. Okay? Again, this is all psukim, not midrashim. I don't want to take the time to do the math. Another time, but you can do working backwards from knowing how old Yaakov is when he reaches Mitzrayim, how old Yosef was, and then how old Yosef was when he sold, and all of these things together, you can do the math, and Yaakov was 91 years old when Yosef was born. Okay, so then so we're talking about a situation where they are at best 14, 15, right? And so I've had teenage sons, and I wasn't 100. But still, right? You say this is really what you just did was really dumb. And what does a teenager say? Right is right, black and white. Right? And Yaakov is perhaps wise enough. We don't know. Is Yaakov the reason why they get the last words because they're right, or is it simply Yaakov says doesn't make sense for me to get into this discussion? Okay, they heard me. And now we'll move on because, I'm not going to convince them otherwise. And as it turns out, though, they seem to be proven right. Right? They are no harm false. And if the story had ended here, we would say that perhaps in this instance, the Torah is giving us a lesson, pragmatism versus idealism, and we go with the idealism. Right? But then, Yaakov at the very end, 45 years or so later, when he gives the brachot, so he curses Shimon and Levi. And he doesn't curse them for pragmatic reasons. He says, and here's the number 3, B'sodam al tavdav b'kalam al techad kvodi ki va'apam hargu ish uvirtzonam ikru shor. Right? He specifically condemns their anger, their wrath, their hot-headedness, and the fact that in doing so they murdered. And the old Ikaru Shor, the Medrash didn't bring the Medrash here, but the Medrash says that the idea of I did bring it. The last line of number 4, Ikaru Shor Ikarten Shuran Shel Gerim. Right, not that they killed oxen, but rather that you had a potential. All of these people had, in effect, converted. They had Brit Milah, and you killed them all. Right, so that is a very different kind of complaint. So Yaakov here takes the, if you will, a different ideal and attacks the ideals of Shimon and Levi. There's a, I'll just say really 30 seconds, perhaps to my mind the most powerful 4 words in Midrash history are right here. This isn't exactly the topic of this year, but Shimon v'Levi achim, number 4, achim ledina v'lo liyosef. Because what this Midrash is saying in those 4 words is that Yaakov was wondering for decades whether Shimon and Levi were right, and he was wrong. When he heard that what Shimon and Levi had done to Yosef, because those are the 2 brothers who were lobbying to kill Yosef. Reuven wants to save him. Yehuda tries to has the maneuver to sell him, and the other brothers are too young or too minor to play a role. So this is a Shimon and Levi want to kill him. So basically, what the Medrash is saying is that Yaakov, we don't know if Yaakov ever really heard. We know that Yaakov could have heard. So he's saying, as long as it was just a question of Dina, maybe you were right. But the moment that you were willing to use the same tools and the same characteristics to kill your brother, so then you're just vigilantes. You're just hot-headed people. And then I can curse you for the action itself. So it's 4 very powerful words. But be that as it may, the notion here, this tug between the pragmatism and the idealism, is a major concern, and it's something which, throughout Jewish history, to this very day, becomes an issue, and it morphs with the circumstances that we find ourselves, and and I hope that we'll get to it towards the end. But it's different today, especially here in the state of Israel, than it was when we were only living in the Golah. So this is a major question. So let's take a look at some of the instances on halachic level where the notion of darkei shalom, just throw out some of the terms that are going to be used, darkei shalom, ways of peace, right, in terms of interaction, meaning that we're going to be doing things a little bit differently in order to preserve peace. Eva seems to be a little bit of a stronger term in terms of it being a question of enmity or to prevent enmity. The darkei shalom has a bit of a positive spin to it. Whereas I'm trying to build peaceful relations. Eva is a more of a negative connotation. I want to try to avoid difficulties, and perhaps worse than difficulties. And the final idea, right, because we're going to see that Eva doesn't necessarily bring us to the level of sakanat nefashot, of it being a question of lives actually being in danger. In other words, it could be just your run-of-the-mill type of garden variety persecution, as opposed to that you're afraid that we're going to now have a situation where we're going to have the Cossacks running through. So that is the different type of terms that are going to be used. So we'll start with darkei shalom. We're going to see how it's applied in many different ways. Some of them have nothing to do with Jew-Gentile relationships. So let's take a look. Number 5 on the flip side of the page. Elu dvarim amru mipnei darkei shalom. So the Mishnah in Gittin says that there gives a list of things. I'm not going to go through the full list. It's a long list. Just look at 1 or 2 examples that Chazal, already in the time of the Mishnah and perhaps earlier, made takanot because of darkei shalom. The first one might surprise you. Kohen koreh rishon va'acharav Levi va'acharav Yisrael mipnei darkei shalom. The idea that you have a Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, and that is the order of the Kriyat Torah that we had this morning, that is mishum darkei shalom. Why? Because, the Gemara explains, quite simply, that and anyone who's been a gabbai knows this quite well, right? People want the first aliyah, or don't have this. People want maftir, or they want that or the other. So every single kriyat Torah is rife for strife. So in order to avoid that, we just simply say we're not good, because after all, who should get the first aliyah? The most important person in the kehillah. So who's the most important person in the kehillah? Well, it depends how many people are in the room. So it's easier simply to say, okay, the Kohen gets it. Okay, and then the Kohanim, 2-3 Kohanim, and fine, that goes on. No, so that is what the first, it's the Darkei Shalom. This is not a question of, that we're afraid of truly dire circumstances in terms of, anything along those lines. Similar to these ideas, they just skip the next one. The Bor Shehu, the third one. Bor Shehu Karov. I'm sorry?
The next one is about Ravin.
Right, so we'll skip that one. Go to the next one. Bor Shehu Karov Le'ama Mitmale Rishon Mipnei Darkei Shalom. So if you have a situation where there's an Amat Mayim is a water channel, which draws water from a spring, and it goes through different fields and allows people to fill their cisterns with water. So, who gets the right? Water rights. These are things that go on to this very day in terms of let's say river around here too, but let's say the Colorado River in the United States. Where is it going? So, who gets the water first? There's no reason per se why the person whose the field is closest should get it first. This is the idea. All of these examples that the Gemara gives until the last one seem to be issues of along those lines, where you have situations where, from a halachic perspective, it's a free for all, and we decide who should get what in order for Darkei Shalom. But when it comes to the last case, and this is the last line in the Mishnah, En mamachin miyad aniyei ovdei kochavim beleket shicha upeya b'pnei darkei shalom. So we do not stop the poor of the non-Jew to gather the various matanot le'evyonim that are given in the field, whether it's the leftover grain, etc. Mipnei darkei shalom. It's in order to foster peace. So we allow them to do this. And here we should realize that there is a bit of a push against, and this comes from the pasuk in Dvarim, number 6. The Torah says, "Unetanam Hashem l'kecha lefanecha." When you come into the land, so you should destroy the nations that are there. Unetanam Hashem l'kecha lefanecha v'hikitam, and you should. God will give them to you, and you should smite them. Hacharem tachrimem otam, destroy them. Lo tichrot lahem brit, do not make a treaty with them, specifically with the Shivat Ha'amim. V'lo tichonem, and do not curry favor with them. Okay, that's a translation. And here the Torah tells us that. Chazal tell us one of the ways to understand this is that you're not allowed to give a gift to a non-Jew. You can't give a gift to a non-Jew for no reason. It's interesting. I think it's Rav Sadia Gaon who says that, because there's several different explanations to this pasuk, all of them that are brought lahalacha, and here Rav Sadia Gaon might be Rabbeinu Bechai. So he says that the letters of the Torah are is the goof of the word. But the punctuation, that's the neshama. So depending on how you punctuate this pasuk and how you pronounce the word techanem, it's going to give you different halachot. So one of the is to give a gift. Another one is that it's usher to sell land to a non-Jew in Eretz Yisrael. That they shouldn't have literally a resting place, a chanayah in the land. In other words, depending on how you translate it, is going to come up with different ideas. So this is so you have a push against it. So now, if you look at the number 8, we'll come back to number 7 in a minute. The Tosfot in the Gemara of Avodah Zarah so ask the following question: Im Tomar Lemanda Asar Lo Techanem. So the idea that it's usur to give a gift. V'chi let la hahid b'farnesin aniyei ovdei kochavim im aniyei Yisrael mipnei darkei shalom. So doesn't he know? There are multiple explanations to this pasuk, but one of them not to give a gift. Doesn't he know that there's the Mishnah that tells you that you're allowed to and that you're supposed to, and because of darkei shalom? V'yesh lomar de darkei shalom ein zo matanat chinam. In other words, the idea of lo techanem is that you're giving it for free, chinam, techanem. Right? So if there's a quid pro quo, so then it's no longer matanat chinam. In other words, the pragmatism here is a positive aspect which takes the isser away. If you take a look at all of the cases, and I didn't because of the time that we have, I'm not going to go through all those cases, but just the case of the water, or the case of the Kohen, they're good examples as any other. It's not simply that when we're talking about darkei shalom, that it's I called it a free-for-all. It's not quite a free-for-all. I mean, as I look at there's a reason why we say it's logical that we'll say a Kohen should get the first aliyah. There are other psukim that v'kidashto, you're supposed to give kavod for a Kohen, you're supposed to do various things for the Kohen. So this is not one of those things, but to understand that a Kohen is a person who is, okay, we'll give him the first aliyah, and then there won't be any arguments. That's a good thing. It makes sense for the water, the person who's going to who has the first water rights to be the one who's furthest upstream. Whereas you have to work out for the people downstream too. But the fact that the person's upstream, to give him that first right makes sense. We're using darkei shalom as a tool, but at the same time there is a logic behind it. Same thing holds true here with the aniyei akum. In other words, we want the peace. This is a positive outcome. And so therefore you can't say that you've just given away the store, you've given something away to this person for no reason. So the idea of darkei shalom is very important here. I'm now going to say we'll go on to the Gemara takes it perhaps one step further. Number 9, the Gemara says, Amar le Abai le Rav Yosef, Mipnei darkei shalom, these are because of darkei shalom, Doraita hi. In other words, it's not, if you're saying, if you take what I just said all the way, you're saying that darkei shalom is a value that you're trying to foster. So then darkei shalom shouldn't be a takana d'Rabbanan. It should be a din d'oraita. After all, Amar le d'oraita midnei darkei shalom. So Rabbi Yosef said to Abaye, "You're right. It is a d'oraita." What we're doing here, if I say to gemilut chasadim, right? So it comes from the pasuk of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Right? Love your neighbor as yourself. And so, as a result, you're supposed to do all sorts of things to help the other. Okay. When you're doing it, you're being Mekayim V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, but there still could be a takana of the Chachamim that you should be involved in Bikur Cholim, in visiting the sick. What you're saying, this is an application of the larger idea. So similarly, we have this larger idea of darkei shalom, and we're going to apply it here to the specific case that the kol haTorah kula na mipnei darkei shalom hu dichtiv derachei darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. So so that is the question that we have at our disposal. That there is this positive value. Now, the question, though, becomes, is this primarily pragmatism? In other words, the application. Pragmatism, or is there a larger value that's at play? So here, let's take a look at this case here with regard to tzedakah and burial because of mishum darkei shalom. The Rambam in number 10 says the following: V'chein yirali shenohagin in gerei toshav b'derech eretz v'gemilut chasadim ki Yisrael. So there's one category of people who are non-Jews who are called gerei ger toshav. A ger toshav, will have applications I hope to reach at the in a few minutes to today. But a ger toshav is a person who we'll say is a legal alien, and this person has to take upon himself the notion of the shivat mitzvat b'nei Noach, as well as understanding the again within the context of the dry halacha, the dominion of the of Jews in the land, and then he's accepted as a ger toshav, and you have the Rambam says you have to now treat him basically as a full citizen, or almost as a full citizen of the land. And harei anu mitzuvin lahachiotan shene'emar leger asher b'sharecha titnena ve'achala. So we have a chiyuv to actively support them in every way in our midst. V'zeh she'amru chachamim, but the Rambam says, but isn't there a line that the chachamim say, ein koflin lahem shalom? You shouldn't respond if someone says good morning to you, so you shouldn't, wishes you shalom, you shouldn't ein koflin lahem shalom, you shouldn't necessarily respond in kind to the non-Jew. So that is be'akum, lo beger toshav. So that's referring to a non-Jew who is an idol worshipper, not with regard to the ger toshav. And afilu ba'akum, and however, even the idol worshipper, tzivu chachamim, even the pagan, tzivu chachamim levakercho lehem, likvor metehem, im metei Yisrael. So we have a tzivui to visit their sick, to bury their dead, together with the dead of Israel, ulefarnes aniyehem bichlal aniyei Yisrael, and to support their poor, together with the poor of Israel, mipnei tarchei shalom. Harei ne'emar tov Hashem l'chol v'rachamav al kol ma'asav, that God is good to all, and His mercy extends to all of His handiworks. V'ne'emar derachei darchei noam v'chol netivotei shalom, and the pasuk says that the Torah's ways are ways of pleasantness, and all of its paths are peaceful. So this is the idea. However, if you saw that I underlined im mitei Yisrael, with mitei Yisrael. Bichlal, I didn't underline, I should have. Bichlal aniyei Yisrael, together with the aniyei Yisrael. And this leads to a question which we'll leave it. Does it? I won't leave it. We'll come back to number 12, where the Rambam had said, "Mefarnesin umechazin aniyei Yakub im aniyei Yisrael mipnei darkei shalom." So the Radvaz in number 14, there's a understanding within the Achronim, and this is a question. Mistaber she'ein advarim amurim ela bizman shehem ba'im bichlal aniyei Yisrael, aval im ba'u b'fnei atzman ein kan tarchei shalom. When do you have to give? Right, you have your community charity chest. When do you have to give it out to the poor who are non-Jews? Only if Jewish poor are there as well. In other words, if they're coming together and you give to this person but you don't give to that person, so then the discrimination is blatant. But if it's a question of a person coming when there are no other Jews around, so according to this, so you could say, you can make your excuses and don't have to support. In other words, basically this approach says Darkei Shalom is just pragmatism. If you are concerned that it's going to have a create a problem, then you're allowed to do it. But if you're not concerned per se about the problem existing, so then you don't have to. Might have to support a ger toshav, and ger toshav is a different person or a different category altogether. But you don't have to support the non-Jew and the pagan as such. So that's with regard to that. However, as I said, when you read the Rambam, so did the Rambam really mean that? It's hard to know, because the Rambam has a very positive spin, and if you didn't think that the Rambam in that first halacha had the positive spin, so certainly in number 11 you have that positive spin. Mutar la'avod be'eved kanani b'farach. So here you're talking about a Canaanite slave. V'af al pi shadin kech midat chasidut v'darchei chochma she'adam rachman v'rodev tzedek. So even though you can work your slave, your non-Jewish slave, hard, but it's not smart and it's not chasidut to do this, because you're supposed to be a merciful person who chases tzedakah. Ve'ena achzariyut v'hazut mitzuya ela ba'akum ovdei zara. And cruelty as a character trait is not a Jewish character trait. Azaro shel Avram Avinu vehem Yisrael sheishbiya lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu tova haTorah v'tziva otam b'chukim mishpatim tzadikim rachmanim hem al hakol. V'chen b'milotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu tzivanu li'idamot behem hu omer v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. And it was the same pasuk that the Rambam had quoted with regard to Aniyei Akum. The Rambam is saying this is the way Jews are supposed to act. We're supposed to be Rachmanim. So the Rambam is framing it in a way which is that there might not be a direct sivui, but as a question of what you're supposed to do, call it the Ruach Halacha, call it the overall character of Jewish society. So you certainly should be supporting that group as well. And this is also brought by, this could very well be this question of whether you have to do it or you're supposed to do it when there are when the non-Jewish poor are there by themselves, really probably comes down to this issue as to whether it's pragmatism or darkei shalom in of itself is the ideal. And it's just an ideal that we're supposed to be aspiring to. And so here, for example, if you take a look at the Ritva, number 15, he explains, I'm not going to read it inside, but basically he says what I just said, that you're supposed to do it regardless. And he says, what does the word im mean, with? It means the same way that you bury Jewish dead, so you should be burying non-Jewish dead. It's with regard to tzedakah, you could talk about a situation of, okay, is this do you have a line of poor people, some of them Jewish, some of them not? With regard to, or they coming individually? When it comes to burial, usually it's an individual case by case. So it's going to be a difficult situation to say, it's only when there is a Jewish, you're burying this Jew, so okay, also bury the non-Jew. It means with the context of the Chevra Kadisha as a whole that you should be concerned with everyone, and that's certainly the way that the Shulchan Aruch paskins lahalacha number 16, that if you'd bet mutar lefarnes aniyehem ulevaker choleihem v'likvor metehem v'lahaspidam v'lachem avleihem mishum darkei shalom. He doesn't differentiate whether there are poor, there are Jewish poor there, non-Jewish poor, and the Shach on his comment makes this very clear. Number 17, mashma afilu below aniyei Yisrael, even without aniyei Yisrael. There are some, just to make it clear, there are some achronim who still limit it, but for the most part, this is considered to be the din regardless. So that's with regard to tzedakah. Now, there is this idea, and this is, I'll say that with regard to the darkei shalom as well, this application of what I mentioned before called eva, of enmity. And there are those who equate the two, and basically say that even if I'm right, which I just said, that you're supposed to give the tzedakah to the non-Jewish poor, even if Jewish poor are not present, that's because they're not idiots. In other words, if you say that, okay, if there's a line of poor people and you say you get, sorry, you get, you don't, etc., so it's pretty clear where the discriminatory practices are. But if a Jewish person comes in, he goes out with money, another person goes in, then the non-Jew comes in an hour later and you give him an excuse, why not? Fine, maybe the first excuse, second excuse. Third time, they're going to figure it out. So it's going to eventually lead to the enmity. So even from a pragmatic perspective, they want to say this. Where do you really see this question coming up? And that's with regard to something which is a difficult concept. And that's the question of Chilul Shabbat. So the case of Chilul Shabbat, so the first, not only Chilul Shabbat, it's a question of preserving life in general. So the Mishnah here, number 18, says the following: Bat Yisrael lo tiyaledet avodat kochavim ovedet kochavim nesha miyaledet ben laoved kochavim. A Jewish midwife, in the first line, should not attend to a non-Jewish woman in her childbirth because you're bringing in a new pagan into the world. Right? Just to put it that way. You're bringing, maybe a cute little pagan, but a pagan. Right? And so that is something that there's a culture conflict. And this is something which is very foreign to us. You have to understand it. Because basically you're saying that, so there's the question of the pagan, it's the question of the Cossack, right? Now, at this point, it's just a little kid, but what will that child grow up to do, right? So should you be involved with that? There is also the question of the question of values. In other words, remember, we are willing to give up our lives and not to worship Avodah Zarah. So now, if you are actively enlarging the pool of pagans, so that is somewhat problematic. The Gemara that's the only line that's really relevant for me right now. The Gemara says the following, 2 lines down: Tanu Rabbanan Bat Yisrael lo te'aledet avodat kochavim mipnei shemiyaledet ben laovedet kochavim. So the quote that we just saw: Va'ovedet kochavim lo te'aledet Bat Yisrael. Okay, so the flip side is that there's a question: should we allow for non-Jewish midwives to attend to Jewish women because we might be afraid that they might kill the baby and claim that it was a stillbirth, etc. That's not our issue right now. Uriminhu, middle of the last line: Yehudit miyaledet ovedet kochavim bischar avalo b'chinam. We have a source that says that a Jewish midwife can attend to a non-Jewish woman because of as long as she's getting paid for her services, but she can't do it for free. She can't do it pro bono. Amar Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef answers the contradiction. Bischar shari mishum eva. The reason why it's permissible for a woman to take her pay and to do it is because this will lead to enmity. In other words, if she's not willing to act in her professional capacities for a non-Jewish woman, so this is going to lead to a lot of tension between the communities. Savar Rav Yosef lemeimar oleidei avodah kochavim b'shabata b'schar. So Rav Yosef wanted to take this one step further and say that even on Shabbat, a woman is allowed to take, a midwife's allowed to take pay in order to attend to a non-Jewish woman. Mishum Eva, Amar le Abaye. So Abaye said, Yachla l'meimalai. No, she shouldn't. Why not? Because she can say the following. This is going to sound very strange. I'm warning you right now. Didan de mintre shapta mechalin alayah. Well, this is something that the non-Jew is going to understand in 4th century Bavel. That we can't be Mechalel Shabbat for non-Jews. We're allowed to be Mechalel Shabbat for Jews because Jews keep Shabbat. But Didachu de lo mintere shabta lo mechalale. You who do not keep the Shabbat, we can't be mechalel. So Abaye says, you can explain your actions, and therefore you shouldn't be mechalel Shabbat. Now, what do you have here? First of all, you have an agreement between Abaye and Rav Yosef in principle. Whereas they're saying that if there's going to be enmity, then you can be mechalel Shabbat. The only question is, will there be enmity in this case? Because Abaye says we can explain it away. Rav Yosef hadn't thought of it, or he didn't agree with it. But that's a question of that's just policy question. But in principle, everyone agrees you can be mechalel Shabbat if you're concerned about Eva, and you can't. Now, let's take one step back. Why can't you be mechalel Shabbat to save a non-Jewish life? It was to begin with. No, so but that is a lot to do because then you won't have the Eva. But I'm just saying in general. Why don't we say pikuach nefesh? We say pikuach nefesh doche Shabbat. Why don't we say pikuach nefesh of a non-Jew is also doche Shabbat? And in principle,
but we do say that
right?
Because of darkei shalom.
So this is the question. Why is it only b'shum darkei shalom?
We violate this Shabbos so that you can...
So here's just something that we have to keep in mind. Right? We know all are familiar with the fact that there are the three cardinal sins that you're not allowed to be over in order to be mechalel Shabbat. In order to save a life. Avodah zarah, gilurat, shelichut damim. Why aren't there now? And we don't have a problem with that psychologically, right? We accept that. Right? We're going to, have to under certain circumstances figure out, when it's permissible, when it's not permissible. What are you going to do? But basically, we accept that concept. The question is there really a fourth? I mean, there's a fourth, which is the overarching idea of Kiddush Hashem. But is there another Aveira specifically that deserves that same category? And it's Chanukah time. We're getting close to it. So you read Sefer Maccabim, and you see that was the shita of the Hashmonaim soldiers, and the Greeks took advantage of it. There was a massacre of 1,000 soldiers who just simply wouldn't pick up their arms because it was Shabbat, and the Greeks knew that, and so they attacked on Shabbat. Okay, it was the idea of it was a machloket. Is Chilul Shabbat, is Pikuach Nefesh Doche Shabbat or not? No, it's the idea the same way if you take Avodah Zarah and you say, well, why do you have to martyr yourself rather than be Oved Avodah Zarah? Because basically what we're saying is a life bought by having to worship a foreign god is not a life worth living. That's not something that life is not as important as that. We have values that are more important to it. We could have theoretically said the same thing about Shabbat. If you mechalel Shabbat, so then you're saying that, in effect, you're saying God isn't the creator. So we have to be mechalel Shabbat, we have to kill ourselves rather than to allow that to happen. That is the machloket. And the Gemara goes through a whole list of trying to figure out exactly why Pikuach Nefesh is Doche Shabbat. So what Abaye is saying here, that once we work out Pikuach Nefesh Doche Shabbat, that's only for those people who are going to keep Shabbat. Because then you're saying, in effect, okay, one Shabbat you're not keeping, but you're going to have a lifetime of Shabbatot afterwards. If you're saving a life which doesn't have that, so then maybe you shouldn't be Mechalel Shabbat. That's the idea. But Eva, if you're, what?
You're talking about the non-Jew.
Yeah.
Well, how about B'nai Noach? B'nai Noach has the 7, I'm sure that,
right.
We have to follow their barbarian, but they had the 7 basic...
Correct, but right now we're not even talking about them. We're talking about people who are worshipping Avodah Zarah. We're talking about people who don't keep Shabbat B'nai Noach. Included in that. So the question is, so how it's, as I said, it's a difficult concept to for us psychologically, for me, I'm speaking for myself, to understand, because we assume that life is a more important value than Shabbat. That's why Pikuach Nefesh Doche Shabbat. But it's not exactly that. It's a question of a life worth living. So now we say, though, that if you have a question of Eva, so then you're allowed to. But we're going to come back to your point in a minute, right? Before we finish. So the question then becomes, well, can you be Michalel Shabbat? So now the discussion in the poskim basically revolves around the question of, well, what is Eva? What is enmity? What actions will lead to enmity? What actions will not lead to enmity? How do you avoid it, etc.? And so just to give you a very stark example, we'll just take the straight halacha as found in Shulchan Aruch. Number 20. Kutit ein miyaldin ota b'Shabbat. So a non-Jewish woman, you should not attend to her giving birth on Shabbat. On that, what?
Even for pay.
Even for pay. Because we accept Abaye. Okay, the halacha. So now, the Mishnah Berurah says the following: Va'afilu b'schar, right? Your point. That's number 21. Debechol miyaldin mishum eva. During the week, we do allow for women to for the midwife to serve because of the concerns of anti-Semitism and the like. Hacha asur mishum diyichola lishtamet v'lomar de'en mechalelin Shabbat ki im lahu deminta Shabbata. Though she can get off the hook, because remember he's writing this in the end of the 19th century. Okay, the woman can get off the hook and say we only do this for people who keep Shabbat. However, katav hamagen Avraham u'makom de'ika lemechash le'eva gam b'chiyai gav nashari. If you're concerned that the non-Jews are going to buy that argument, so then it's mutter on Shabbat im ein bachilul. If you're not doing a isur de'oraita, only a derabbanan. And then he continues, Vida, no, the harofim bizmanenu. Right now we're talking about the late 19th century. You have Jewish doctors. Haskalah is in full flourish. And so he says, the doctors amongst us, afilu hayoter ksherim, even the ones that are more kosher. Now, as you can see that the Mishnah Berurah did not hold in high regard those people, the maskilim. Einam nizharim bezeh, klal. We see our physicians travel long distances in order to heal the non-Jewish ill. And they write prescriptions and they prepare the medicines. There's nothing for them to rely on, he says. Even if you're going to say that if it's a rabbinic prohibition, you can do it. Mishum eva ben golim isud oraita bevadai asur lekulei alma umechalei Shabbat gemurim heim b'mezid Hashem yishmerena. It's terrible. This is the Chavetz Chaim. This is, as I said, late 19th century. Now, just to compare, Rav Moshe Feinstein has to deal with this, and this is a tshuva from the 1960s, 1970s. By the way, the position of Mishnah Berurah might have been said, it was always ignored. Just to, and Rav Moshe though can't understand it. He says so it's a question of, he's dealing with a question of rounds. If you have a doctor who wants to know, does he have to change his rounds to avoid Chilul Shabbat, yes or no? That's the question that he's being asked. And he says the following. If you have to be, so the Moshe says, if you can change with a Sunday instead of a Saturday, great. If he doesn't have a choice and he has to be in the hospital on Shabbat, or he's already has he's no longer a resident, and he's and as such, though his office is closed on Shabbat, but dafka elav dachri choleh b'davar shu sakana, but he, even though his office was closed, but he's on call, and he gets the call, and there's indeed a non-Jew whose life is in danger. So then he should get involved on Isur D'Oraita. Kol sheken kishenizdamen eza ason samuch lebeiteo shekoren lerofea samuch yoter. And all the more so if some kind of accident, some kind of catastrophe occurs near to his home, and they need all the medical help that they can get. He should tend to people. What Abaye said in Bavel in the 4th century was not going to work in the United States in the 1970s. This is when he's writing the tshuva. It's just impossible to accept. So first of all, the doctor himself should be worried that if he does this, right, he might be targeted by the family of the patient. And even if he's not fearing for his own personal safety. In other words, you're expecting. You have to expect what will be the repercussions be overall in society. Etc. It goes through it. Okay, fine. And then the last line of this paragraph. What he wrote. Right, and he quotes the whole thing. He said, "I can't understand how the Chavetz Chaim wrote this at all." Ha Berusland, right, Berussia, Ba'ayarot Aktanot, and Rav Moshe lived there in the beginning of the 20th century. Ba'ayarot Aktanot, Shahaya Rak Rofei Achad L'chol Hasviva, Arei Vaday Barur, Im Lo Haya Olech L'Rafot Et Ha'akum Haya Barur, Shayu Hargin Oto B'Tanatam, and it was like he's saying, basically saying, where was the Chavetz Chaim living? He wasn't living in the Russia that I was living in. Right? We're in the same Russia, but this is not what was going to happen. He just cannot possibly understand it. And more than that, long before the Chavetz Chaim, the Chassam Sofer had said the same thing. He said, and this is number 23, I won't read it inside, but it basically says, if you have sakana, and we know that we're going to have sakana, he's writing in the Austro-Hungarian rule, but still, it's obvious that this is going. If you're a doctor and you don't attend to non-Jewish patients on Shabbat, so it's not going to end well, right? So there's no question that it's mutar. However, and this is, but we'll just take it one step further because then I want to get to the flipping things a little bit, and so this is understood in. By a long string of poskim, and it also impacts on things along the lines of rescue missions and the like, to countries outside of Israel, where all of the victims are not Jewish, etc. Can you be Mechalel Shabbat in order to do that? So Rav Ovadia in his tshuva basically says, but he is just one of many, said that you have to take this principle and apply it to modern society and modern technologies in terms of communication. So we all know what will happen. How long will it take for anyone to know that someone decided not to be Mechalel Shabbat? In order, we're not going to send out a rescue mission. Why? Because it's Shabbat. We'll do it tomorrow, right? So and then on Shabbat itself, we're going to stop. How long is it going to take for anyone to know this in our modern world, and what will the repercussions be? So, a very broad application of the concept of Eva, and so for all practical purposes, this will lead to the following ideas. But you have to understand: yes, you can be Mechalel Shabbat, and yes, you can do what you need to do. However, right? Since it's a b'di'avad, if you're taking this approach, so then you have to ask yourself all the different questions of what are the extent of the b'di'avad? Or should you try to do things on a d'Rabbanan level instead? Can you avoid it? If you can avoid it, should you avoid it? On the way back, you're the doctor, you went to the hospital. Are you allowed now to return home? The whole reason that you're allowed to return home is so that the next time you'll be able to go, right? But now, if that doesn't apply under these circumstances, so maybe you have to, ironically, person who's Mechalel Shabbat is now going to have to actually stay longer in order to to do things that he wouldn't do because of if he was being Mechalel Shabbat for Jewish. So this is, if you will, if you're working with the concept of Eva. I'll take all the questions after the shir because we're very close to the end. There's another approach entirely. And this is already found, it really begins with the establishment of the state. And you see its precursors in Tshuvot of Rav Herzog, of Rav Unterman, was the second chief rabbi of the state of Yisrael after Rav Herzog passed away. In a slew of Tshuvot, Rav Chaim David Halevi, etc. And the one who says this perhaps most clearly and strongly is Rav Rabinovich Zatzal in his tshuva. Here is the question, number 27, in his collection of tshuvot with regard to military issues. Sheila, agoy shenivtza b'Shabbat. Ha'im mutar l'chalel olav et Shabbat va'ad kama. Okay, simple question, straightforward, but this is within the context of the army. So this is the answer. So you have a goy who's wounded on Shabbat. To what extent can you be mechalel Shabbat? Tshuva, sheila zo mitchalaket l'shtayim. So he says you have to deal with this from two different perspectives in terms of the non-Jew. Number one is lo Yehudi shehu muslimi o notzri hagun. So you have somebody who is
Where are you?
I'm sorry, I'm number 27 in the second line where it says tshuva. So she'ela zo mitchaleket l'shtayim. This question can be divided to two. Aleph lo Yehudi shehu muslimi o notzri hagun. Va'eino chashud. It should be eino, not anu. Eino chashud b'maasei retzak v'chabala. And he's basically a upstanding citizen, and he's not suspected in any way of having been the mechabel or anything along those lines. Prat, we would say an innocent civilian. Prat im af hu misharet betzal, and all the more so if you're dealing with a Druze soldier or a Muslim soldier, etc. As you're dealing with a fellow soldier. That's, if you will, group number one. Group number two, mechabel sheniftza v'nitfas. So if you have a terrorist who has been wounded and now has been captured in terms of being Mechalel Shabbat in order to save him. I didn't bring what he writes about that. There he says it's basically Eva. When if you're dealing with a terrorist, so then it's a question of what will the repercussions be. Right? And generally speaking, given the world that we live in, and we've seen instances of this, is that you're Mechalel Shabbat for that person as well, because if you're not, so there will be all sorts of inquiries in the Hague. So that is something that we have to deal with. But that's in terms of Evan, that there you're dealing with a person who is a murderer, in effect, and you have the question of treating him on Shabbat. But what about your fellow soldier? What are you talking about? What do you do? What about the non-combatant, etc.? So here he gives a completely different approach. Katav Maritz Chayot, because of the time, the Maritz Chayot was a leading posek in the mid-19th century. Hanotzrim asher ma'aminim b'dat v'torah min hashamayim bli safek shedineim hetzleinu keger toshav. Now this is a minority approach. I want to stress it's a minority approach, but in our circumstances, I think it becomes more and more could be more of a majority approach. Namely, that how do you view non-Jews in our midst? So the non-Jew, he wants to claim that with regard to Christians, and this is another question of whether Christianity is considered to be idolatry or not. But Christians today are going to be considered to be ger toshav, not akum. Ger toshav. Va'af shemishtatfim davar acher ba'avodotam. Okay, so it gets into the question. V'chen ha'yishmaelim, the second line. Einam ovdei avodah zarah v'gam medakdekim al sheva mitzvot. So the same holds true with regard to Muslims. V'chol sheshomer sheva mitzvot. This is the key line. Kol sheshomer sheva mitzvot b'mnei shenitztaveh b'torah al pi Hashem b'yad Moshe harei zeh ger toshav etzleinu. So whoever keeps the 7 mitzvot, the 7 Noahide laws, recognizing that they have been given to. So this is the rub. How important is it that you have to recognize? Oh, there's a Torah that was a Mosaic Torah. But he wants to claim that it's close enough because they recognize the Bible. Hareze ger toshav etzlenu. So then that person is considered to be a ger toshav. And when it comes to ger toshav, nizon mi Yisrael u'mitzvah alav lahachayoto. And so you have now, when it comes, the moment that we have changed the non-Jew, and we say the non-Jew is no longer a pagan, but rather we're viewing that person as basically being a ger toshav, and add something that he doesn't say here, at least not in this paragraph explicitly, but when you are, but others talk about this as well as he does in other places. If you're talking about a citizen of the country, in other words, now that we have our own country, so then the non-Jewish citizen can be considered to be a ger toshav within the context of in a democratic society. There is another question. There's another shita, the Ramban, which is based on what what Rabinovich and the Maritz Chayot before him are basing themselves on. The Ramban, we're not going to read it inside because of the time, but number 25 and number 26, the Ramban says explicitly that you have the chiyuv to pikuach nefesh toche Shabbat includes the ger toshav. Doesn't include the akum. So basically what you're saying is that if I said in terms of value system, so I said before, well, you can't be Mechal Shabbat for someone who doesn't keep Shabbat. So Ger Toshav doesn't have to keep Shabbat. But a Ger Toshav recognizes is a monotheist. Ger Toshav is a person who recognizes God's dominion in the world. Ger Toshav recognizes also that there is the Jewish people. All of that together means that his life, if you will, is a life worthy of being Mechalel Shabbat for. Right? That's how far the Ramban. Right? We're not talking about a left-wing modern Orthodox rabbi. Right? The Ramban is willing to say that you have a chiyuv to do so. And so based on that, and getting back to the idea that we said earlier with regard to the Rambam of the Darkei Shalom being a positive principle and not simply a question of avoiding issues, not just pragmatic concerns, but rather it's an expression of how our values are developing and growing and changing and hopefully improving. So that is a very important point with regard to Chilul Shabbat. I'll just close by saying that even those who disagree with him. So the number 28 is, I brought a piece from the Pnei Halacha, the last makor, the Rav Melamed. So he feels that it's important that Rav Rabinovich has the following. I'll just read it and then with that we'll close. Rav Rabinovich b'Muludei Milchama Amud 145. So you're more than welcome to look it up. Hey via Divrei Ramban, and he gives the idea, and he says we should point out that the Vilna Gaon didn't accept the Ramban, and many didn't accept the Maritz Chayot. In other words, he doesn't disagree with the Rav Rabinovich's logic. He just says that you're building yourself on shitot which are not universally held, whereas Eva is universally held, as we saw. Umikol makom gam lemekilim. So even if you're going to accept Rav Rabinovich, he says, Yesh li zaher shelo lachil svara zo al stam goyim. So now you have to ask yourself, and who falls into the category of ger toshav? So this is now more of a question of values. Who falls into it? Because he points out, B'kvar yushata'u lichlol et rov b'nei ha'am ha'germani ha'minumas b'chlal gerim v'toshavim. The Maritz Chayot, when he started talking about these things, so it was the mid-19th century, he himself was a major posek, but he was also a maskil, and he was recognizing the importance of general culture, and he was a learned person as well, academically trained, and so the question is, well, we know how that turned out. If we're looking at looking back 80 years or so, and so this is the question. So I think that we could answer Rav Melamed, and I fall strongly in the Rav Rabinovich camp personally. Not that I'm a posek, but that but having said that, there is the question of the caution that needs to be asked. In other words, you have to be asking all of these are issues which are not simple issues. They weren't simple from day one, going back to Yaakov and Shimon and Levi, and they haven't become that much simpler since. But at the same time, we have to be looking at the world from a broader perspective, but at the same time, questioning our broader perspective simultaneously. Okay.
The concept of a Toshav, that also apply